Rome shimmered under the early spring sun. The warm light spilled onto terracotta rooftops, brushed against marble statues, and illuminated the cobblestone streets with a golden hue that made everything look like a painting. Inside a penthouse nestled in the heart of Trastevere, Dr. Alessia Bianchi moved through her pristine kitchen with her usual calm precision. The espresso machine hummed quietly as she checked the time on the sleek silver clock above the doorway. She was 34 years old, a cardiologist at one of Rome's most prestigious hospitals, known for her sharp intellect and even sharper intuition. Patients trusted her not only for her skill but for her calm presence-er ability to explain the human heart, both biologically and emotionally. Alessia lived what most would call a dream life. Her husband, Marco Rossi, was a powerful businessman, wealthy, well-connected, and by all accounts, deeply devoted. At 37, Marco had built a reputation in real estate and investment circles for his strategic genius. They had met 7 years ago at a charity gala. He had charmed her with his confidence, his sense of humor, and a smile that suggested he always knew a little more than everyone else in the room. Their life together was luxurious, beautiful, and organized to perfection. Weekend getaways to Lake Como, wine tastings in Tuscany, Michelin-star dinners in Milan. Their apartment was elegant and modern glass, steel, and soft neutrals that reflected a curated life. And yet, in recent months, Alessia had begun to feel a quiet restlessness beneath all the beauty. It started with the little things. Marco was coming home late more often, offering vague explanations about work meetings running over or spontaneous networking dinners. His phone seemed permanently glued to his side, and while he was never overtly secretive, there was a growing sense that something was off. Then, one Thursday evening, something shifted. Marco had come home late, again nearly midnight. Alessia was already in bed reading when she heard the front door close. He smelled of whiskey and expensive cologne, loosened his tie, and claimed he'd grabbed a bite alone at a new place near Piazza Navona. "Nothing fancy," he said, kissing her forehead. "Just needed to clear my head after a long day." She smiled, nodded, and turned back to her book. But later, while tidying up, she found something odd. A folded receipt lying near the coat rack. A credit card slip. She picked it up casually, expecting it to confirm his story, but it didn't. The meal listed was extensive multiple entrees, 2 desserts, a bottle of wine, and a high-end appetizer platter. Far too much for one person. She didn't say anything that night. She tucked the receipt into her bedside drawer and stared at the ceiling for a long time after the lights were off. In the following days, she started noticing patterns. Marco's work nights had become more frequent in the last 2 months. He was more distracted during conversations, more attached to his phone, and noticeably absent during family events or weekend brunches. Still, Alessia didn't want to jump to conclusions. Her logical, doctor's mind told her not to accuse without evidence. And besides, she loved her husband. She had built a life with him. Trust, after all, was the foundation of any lasting relationship. But fate delivered her more than just suspicions. It gave her a clue. Marco was currently chasing a lucrative investment deal. He had spent months courting a potential business partner, a man named Giuseppe Brunoin, older, respected figure in the industrial property world. Bruno was seasoned, well-connected, and influential. Marco had spoken often about how this partnership would elevate everything: his business, his reach, their future. To win Giuseppe's favor, Marco decided to host a private dinner at their home. Alessia found out only a few days prior, when Marco casually mentioned they'd be entertaining the Brunos on Saturday. "It'll be nice," he said, pouring wine into her glass that night. "I want you to meet them. Giuseppe's wife will be there, and his daughter too, Alice. She's around your age, I think." Alessia smiled, hiding the unease that had grown into a low thrum in her chest. When Saturday came, she dressed careful in navy satin gown, delicate jewelry, a touch of classic red lipstick. The dinner was elegant, the food perfectly prepared, the wine flowing smoothly. Their home looked like a spread from an architecture magazine. And the Brunos? As composed and refined as one might expect. Giuseppe Bruno was distinguished, silver-haired, polite, and businesslike. His wife was graceful and quiet, sipping her wine slowly, nodding approvingly at Alessia's decor choices. But it was Alice who drew Alessia's attention. 28, blonde, and effortlessly beautiful, Alice had a casual boldness about her, her laughter too loud, her gaze too direct, her presence somehow too familiar. As the evening wore on and the drinks flowed, Alice began talking more freely. "I had the most amazing Chinese food last week," she said, her cheeks flushed from wine. "There's this place near Campo de Fioriso, authentic, I swear. The dumplings? Incredible." Alessia's stomach turned. Alice went on. "We had a whole spread Peking duck, hot pot, even sake. I went with someone, very handsome." She giggled and shot a glance across the table at Marco, who didn't say a word. But Alessia saw the tiny smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Her blood went cold. The receipt, the date, the dishes, the man. Alice didn't need to say his name. Alessia knew. She gripped her wineglass tighter, nails pressing into her palm. The sounds of laughter, clinking forks, and soft jazz in the background became a distant hum as her heart pounded. Still, she smiled. She laughed at the right moments. She nodded politely and offered dessert. She played the perfect hostess. But inside, something was breaking. She didn't confront Marco that night. She didn't confront Alice either. Instead, she waited, observed, calculated. She would not scream. She would not cry. She was a surgeon, trained to stay calm under pressure. If her marriage was a patient on the table, it was bleeding out quietly, and she intended to diagnose it completely before deciding whether to save it or let it die. That night, when the guests had left and the dishes were cleared, she lay next to Marco in silence, staring at the ceiling once again. The pieces were falling into place. She didn't need a confession. She needed a plan. Rome's golden haze had lost its charm. The days after the dinner passed with Alessia moving through her routine like a ghost. She went to the hospital, saw patients, smiled when necessary, but all of it felt like watching herself from a distance. Nothing was real anymore. Her world, once so carefully curated, was starting to unravel thread by thread, and she was the only one who could feel the slow undoing. Marco was slipping away. That much was clear. He still came home, still kissed her cheek, still asked about her day, but his eyes never lingered. He laughed, but it never reached his eyes. He touched her, but it felt like politeness, not love. And every time his phone buzzed and he turned it face down on the table, Alessia felt the quiet scream in her chest. She had always trusted her instincts. They'd made her an exceptional surgeon. They had saved lives. And now, they were screaming at her, louder every day. "He's cheating. He's lying. He's not the man you thought he was." But suspicion wasn't enough. Alessia needed proof. Cold, hard, undeniable truth. It came on a Wednesday night. Marco had texted earlier saying his meeting was running late. He wouldn't be home until after 10. Alessia had nodded to herself and said nothing. She made herself a small dinner, tidied the already spotless apartment, and got ready for bed. But she didn't sleep. Instead, she lay still in the darkened room, listening. Her eyes fixed on the ceiling as the clock ticked toward midnight. The sound of the door opening was soft, almost cautious. She heard Marco's shoes on the tile floor, his keys hitting the bowl by the door, the faint rustle of him loosening his tie. She closed her eyes just enough to seem asleep. He entered the room with the subtle sway of a man who'd had too much to drink. The scent of whiskey clung to him, rich, smoky, and bitter. He moved quietly, trying not to wake her, and collapsed onto the bed beside her with a soft sigh. Minutes passed. His breathing slowed. She opened her eyes. The dim light from the hallway gave her enough illumination to see his phone lying on the bedside table, screen down, charger unplugged. A careless move. He always plugged it in. Not tonight. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure he could hear it. But she kept still, moved slowly, her training in precise movement now repurposed for espionage. She picked up the phone. Marco's passcode hadn't changed. It was still the same 6 digits he'd used since they got married her birth date. The irony made her throat tighten. The screen lit up. She navigated to his messages. And there it was. Alice. The thread was long, intimate, and damning. I miss your hands on me. Last night was incredible. I've never felt like this before. I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore. Her fingers scrolled, and with every message, the air grew heavier. Photos, jokes, plans, secrets. It wasn't just sex. It was affection, a relationship, a betrayal with depth. She read until she couldn't anymore. Alessia placed the phone back exactly where it was and lay back down, eyes wide open, body stiff with the weight of truth. Tears didn't come. Not yet. Instead, she felt the numb spread like anesthesia before a major operation. She was watching her life hemorrhage, and she needed to figure out how to stop the bleeding. The next morning, Marco left for work without noticing a thing. Alessia kissed him on the cheek, made him coffee, even smiled. He didn't know he'd already lost. She called one person that day, Giulia Ferretti, her lawyer. A former classmate from university, Giulia was one of Rome's most formidable family law attorneys. Brilliant, fearless, and fiercely loyal to Alessia. They met at a quiet cafe near the courthouse. Alessia ordered a single espresso. Giulia went for a macchiato and immediately leaned in. You're too calm. That worries me. Alessia smiled faintly. I'm done crying over what-ifs. I have facts now. Giulia nodded. Then let's talk strategy. For the next few hours, Alessia laid out everything. The timeline, the messages, the dinner party with Giuseppe, Bruno, and Alice, the look Marco and Alice had exchanged, the whispered confessions, the credit card receipts, the lies. Giulia listened intently, scribbling notes, occasionally shaking her head. He's an idiot, but this is good. It's all admissible. I'm not just interested in leaving him, Alessia said. Her voice didn't waver. I want him to suffer. I want him to feel every inch of this betrayal. I want to dismantle the illusion he's built. Giulia sipped her coffee slowly. You want revenge. I want justice. They worked on a plan, step by step, no detail overlooked. Alessia didn't change her behavior at home. She cooked. She laughed at Marco's jokes. She even planned a weekend trip to the Amalfi Coast. He had no idea. But behind the scenes, documents were being drawn, assets traced, accounts analyzed. Giulia's team worked like surgeons, careful, methodical, lethal. Alessia wasn't impulsive. She didn't lash out. She was gathering strength. She knew that if she wanted the upper hand, she had to control the narrative. When she confronted Marco, it wouldn't be in a moment of weakness. It would be a moment of power. Late at night, when he was asleep beside her, she lay awake rehearsing what she would say, visualizing his face, planning her tone, practicing the silence that would follow. And then there were the emotional tolls. Alessia journaled obsessively. She needed to get it out somewhere. In those pages, she let herself fall apart. She wrote about the betrayal, the humiliation, the loneliness, the disbelief that the man she had loved could so thoroughly lie to her face night after night. But even in those pages, the anger never consumed her. What lived there was something sharper, focused, unforgiving. She started working out more, running longer, sleeping less, reading legal cases in the early hours of the morning. Her life had shifted from love to war, and she was in training. A week later, she met with Giulia again. He still has no idea, Alessia said, stirring her tea. Good. Let him stay comfortable. It'll make the fall worse. I want the confrontation to be clean. Clinical. Not dramatic. Giulia smiled. Exactly. You want him stunned, not defensive. You want silence, not shouting. That's how you win. Alessia nodded. Her face was calm, her eyes steady. "Then let's get to work," she said. The stage was almost set. The next move would be the most painful. But Alessia wasn't afraid anymore. She had been betrayed. Now she would be the one doing the cutting. This time, with surgical precision. The days that followed blurred into one another, each more strained than the last. Alessia maintained the illusion of a calm, composed wife, but beneath the surface, a tempest brewed. Marco continued his caradestal sweet-talking her with practiced lies, still heading off to late-night meetings, and increasingly, taking short-notice business trips that never quite added up. One Thursday morning, Marco announced he had to leave town for 2 nights. "Giuseppe wants to look at properties in Florence," he said casually while sipping espresso. "We might stay at the Excelsior. It's last minute. I'll be back Saturday night." Alessia nodded, offering a polite smile. "Sounds important." He kissed her cheek and left, briefcase in hand, the scent of cologne trailing behind him. Once he was gone, Alessia stood frozen in the hallway for a moment, the silence screaming in her ears. Then, with methodical calm, she called her private investigator. She already suspected where Marco was going. She just needed confirmation. By Friday afternoon she had it. A copy of the Excelsior Hotel registry. Marco's name was there, and so was Alice's, checked in just 20 minutes after him, the final nail in the coffin. Over the next 2 weeks, Alessia and her lawyer, Julia, worked with precision. They had tracked Marco's assets, isolated Alessia's financial interests, and prepared a strategy that would ensure Alessia was not only protected post-divorce, but positioned to thrive. Every account, every property, every shared investment. Alessia was now 5 steps ahead. "If he tries to hide anything, we'll find it," Julia said with satisfaction during one of their late-night meetings. "And the public exposure? Only if you want it." Alessia smiled for the first time in days. "Oh, I want it." They chose the perfect day. The partnership signing ceremony between Marco and Giuseppe Bruno was to be held in a grand ballroom at the Hotel Eden, overlooking the city. It would be an evening of champagne, celebration, and cameras. Alessia received a formal invitation. Marco insisted she attend, grinning as he handed it to her. "It would mean a lot to me. This partnership is the beginning of something huge." She kissed his cheek, her smile unreadable. "I wouldn't miss it." The week leading up to the event was hell. Alessia barely slept. Her stomach churned with anticipation. Her hands trembled when she was alone. The betrayal had become her shadow, following her through hospital corridors and into operating rooms. Her work had always been her sanctuary. Now, even there, she was haunted. She would go from silent weeping in the shower to cold determination over breakfast. Her emotions moved like tide zone moment drowning, the next sharpening into resolve. She clung to Julia's counsel, and to her own discipline, no matter how deeply Marco had hurt her. She refused to collapse. Not in front of him, not in front of anyone. And then the day came. Alessia dressed with care. Sleek black dress, subtle diamonds, hair in an elegant twist. Her expression? Composed, unreadable. She arrived at the party like a ghost in satin silent, graceful, with a storm in her chest. The ballroom was a glittering tableau of Rome's business elite. Marco was beaming, holding court by the champagne tower, Giuseppe Bruno at his side. Alice was there too, in a crimson dress, laughing too loudly. Alessia waited. The speeches began. Toasts were made. Applause echoed. And then the moment. "Let's make it official," Giuseppe announced, holding the contract. Marco and Giuseppe each took a pen. The cameras flashed. Before Marco could sign, Alessia stepped forward. The room went quiet. An almost supernatural hush descended. It was as if the air itself held its breath. "Excuse me," she said, her voice like ice slicing through velvet cool, deliberate, laced with controlled fury. Every head turned. Marco blinked, startled. "Alessia?" Alessia's heels clicked with lethal elegance as she walked to the center of the room. Her pulse was thundering in her ears, but her face remained a mask of grace. Her inner voice whispered, Now, she looked at Marco, then at Giuseppe. Before any ink touches that paper, I believe there's something you should know, Mr. Bruno. Something about the man you're about to trust with your business. Gasps began to ripple before she even finished the sentence. Giuseppe narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Alessia took one last breath, sharp and steady, and turned to face the entire crowd. Your daughter, she said, her voice unwavering, resonant like a perfectly struck chord, has been sleeping with my husband. The silence that followed was instant and violent, like a glass shattering inside a cathedral. Someone dropped a champagne flute. Alice stood frozen, color draining from her face. Marco opened his mouth, stammered, Alessia, please. But she cut him off, a single flick of her hand silencing him. For months, she continued, voice calm but pulsing with suppressed rage. Business trips, hotel rooms, lies, all behind my back while I stood beside him. I have evidence, registry logs, messages, photos. The crowd was still, a tapestry of disbelief. Giuseppe's eyes darted between his daughter and Marco. Is this true? Neither of them could answer. Their silence was confession enough, and in that silence, Alessia turned slightly, her voice soft now but filled with steel. I thought the people in this room deserved the truth before committing to a partnership built on deception. Then she turned to Marco one final time. You underestimated me. Without another word, she walked away, each step precise, regal, final. She moved through the crowd like a queen abandoning a fallen kingdom. Outside, under the Roman sky, the air felt electric against her skin. She inhaled deeply. For the first time in months, her lungs felt full, her spine unburdened. She had delivered the truth, unflinching and brutal, and the weight of it fell where it belonged. Not on her shoulders, on his. She let her lips curl into the faintest smile, not out of cruelty, out of triumph. Because in that room, with every eye watching, Marco had finally been exposed not by rage, not by scandalous fury, but by the calm, composed vengeance of the woman he thought he could betray. Alessia was free, and Marco? He was finished. The aftermath unfolded like a carefully scripted play, each scene more satisfying than the last for Alessia, at least. The day after the Hotel Eden debacle, Alessia filed for divorce. Her legal team, led by the relentless Julia, moved swiftly and strategically. Marco, blindsided and humiliated, tried to save face, but there was no defense left. The evidence Alessia had was damning and undeniable. Within 3 months, the divorce was finalized. Marco was ordered by the court to pay Alessia a substantial alimony settlement. The judge took into account the emotional distress, public embarrassment, and the years Alessia had invested in their marriage and in supporting Marco's career. Multiple properties, luxury vehicles, and several accounts were now solely in Alessia's name. She walked away not just free, but financially secure and empowered. The partnership with Giuseppe Bruno? Obliterated. Giuseppe, furious and betrayed, refused to sign anything after the public humiliation. With his daughter disgraced and his name entangled in scandal, he severed all ties with Marco. The deal, once hailed as a game-changer, vanished in an instant. Marco's business took a nosedive. Investors pulled out. Clients distanced themselves. His reputation, once carefully curated, crumbled overnight. And Alice? She vanished from social circles. What had been scandalous gossip turned into cruel mockery. Paparazzi hounded her for weeks. Her name became synonymous with betrayal in the tabloids. The Scarlet Woman of Rome. Months passed, but the storm didn't. Their affair stayed on magazine covers, talk shows, and dinner party conversations. The story had everything: power, sex, betrayal, and revenge. It was irresistible and unforgettable. Meanwhile, Alessia thrived in her quiet, steady way. She returned to her work with renewed focus, taking on more complex cases and earning even greater respect in the medical community. Her patients adored her, her colleagues admired her, and the hospital she once walked through in silent pain now echoed with confidence in her every step. She traveled more, indulged in simple luxuries, and took time to rediscover what made her feel alive. There were dinners with old friends, long drives down the coast, and quiet mornings spent with coffee and a book, sunlight warming her skin through tall windows. Justice, Alessia realized, didn't always need applause. It could exist in the silence, after truth, in the peace that follows chaos, in the life you rebuild brick by brick after someone tried to burn it down. Yes, the world could be cruel, but it could also be just. Because betrayal, Alessia knew now, always carries a price. And in the end, the betrayer always pays, with interest.